Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we take a deep dive on a single question of today's reading and examine a single question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Zack, Unkenholz, and we're looking at a passage from Genesis chapter 6. Verses 1 through 8 of Genesis chapter 6 give us this, it's a bridge between the genealogy of chapter 5 and the flood narrative of chapter 6. Starting in verse 9, and it introduces us to some things that I want to talk about today. It says, "Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth, for whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes of famous warriors of ancient times." And so this passage is kind of divided in the two parts. It tells us this strange story of sons of God and their intermarriage and procreation to the daughters of man. And it mentions a group known as Nephilim. So you see that in verse 4, and then following verses 5 through 8 becomes this short instruction or introduction to what the flood story is going to be about. So there's this human wickedness, and the Nephilim. So I'll define that, and then we'll talk about the sons of God in just a minute. Is a Hebrew term used here. It only occurs here and then in Numbers chapter 13, where it's associated with these gigantic people or people of unusual height. The great height of the Nephilim, who are described as the sons or descendants of Anak in Numbers 13:33, discourages the Israelites from conquering the promised land. So when the 10 spies go to the promised land, 8 of them say that we look like grasshoppers in their eyes. And this unusual height is associated with several different clans in the Old Testament, before, during, and after the days of Moses and Joshua. Many of the ancient Jewish texts and translations for the word describe men of inordinate height, but some other versions, like the origin of the term Nephilim is kind of uncertain. We don't really know where it came from. It may come from the root, a Hebrew word, nephal, which literally means fallen ones. However, the meaning of fallen ones is uncertain, so it's hard to know if that's what they're talking about. It's also unclear if Nephal should be associated with Nephilim, because they're not spelled exactly the same. The term Nephilim is not a synonym for the sons of God. That's a mistake that sometimes people make. They read Nephilim and they read sons of God and they think, okay, they're the same thing. They're not. Though they could be and probably are the offspring of the sons of God. That seems to be the indication here in this passage. The term Nephilim, afterward, it seems that Nephilim were on the earth after the flood. That's Numbers 13. So this is pre-flood. We don't know where they came from after the flood, because if we take a literal interpretation of Scripture, the only humans left after the flood would have been Noah and his family. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of background on what Nephilim were. But the question I wanted to talk about today were, who are the sons of God and why are they here? So Zack, what are your thoughts about who the sons of God are and why are they here?
Yeah, so doing some research on this, there's kind of two major things I've heard. Some people think that they are literally, like, as this says, the fallen ones, that they are the fallen angels, right? They're the ones that followed Satan and that were cast out, and now they're causing trouble on earth, having intercourse with human women. The other thing, which I had never heard before until doing research on this, is that they could be the sons of Seth, who's the third child of Adam and Eve, and that the ones who have turned away from God or married outside the faith. It could be, they're just human though. So it would be humans, the sons of Seth, who are like the children of Seth, who then turned away from God, and almost as like punishment or in some weird way, their children were these giants. I for one, I think that due to the supernatural, it seems that they're supernatural. It seems they're unnatural, right? That God is unpleased with what's going on with the fallen ones being with the human women. My assumption is that they are either fallen angels or angels that have disobeyed God in this way or have gone against God, his natural order.
If you take the reading of Scripture as a totality, we would have to say the sons of God were angels. Otherwise, we would have to question the other times it uses the same terminology in Scripture that we consider it to be angels. Because there are, the question then becomes, how do they operate like humans?
Yeah.
But we have other instances of this in Scripture where angels, even not fallen angels, operate in human form. So one visits. Now, there's debate about whether this is Jesus, or an angel visits Abraham, and Abraham makes him a meal, or Sarah makes him a meal, and they eat together, so they're operating in the natural realm as natural people. And there are movies that have been made that would kind of portray that, even though they're somewhat cheesy.
Like Cupid, like the baby angels, or just like glowing humans with a halo.
What was the movie, the TV show? Something about angels. Had Michael Landon in it.
I don't know. The only thing I think of angels in the outfield. That's what I think of when I think of like an angel, like in
Daniel,
a movie.
help us out. Touched by an Angel. Yeah. Was a TV show that ran for a long time on TV. If I remember right, the concept was it was an angel in human form. But these would be fallen angels. Now, we also, we get to the New Testament, places like 2 Peter, he tells us that now they're bound up, right? They're not, active in human form, but these were cast out, Why do you think, if they were cast out of heaven or followed Satan after he was cast out of heaven, whatever, why do you think they are on the earth taking on human form or having children with women?
Yeah. I guess my thought in that would be that what Satan wanted, the reason why Satan fell, was because he wanted what God had, right? He wanted to be God in essence. Instead of worshiping him, he wanted to be God or have the power. And I think one of the greatest things that God has done is created man in his image, right? That's one thing that is, and we are created to glorify God, through all that we do. And so I could understand that as the fallen ones, that they too would want something to be created in their image to glorify themselves. And so I could see that the Nephilim, that the Nephilim or their children were these, huge human beings who had great power. And I think that could be a in pride, they wanted to do that and have intercourse with the women so that they too could have something created in their image. But again, I think that's why it upsets God so much. And one of the reasons for the flood is because they're distorting the image of God, and God is never happy with that.
As we record this, I'm preparing to preach a sermon on Jude, and Jude alludes to this. He says, "And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of that great day." And the Second Peter talks about how they possessed men and cohabitated with women. That's kind of what it tells us. It's hard for us to understand. Like, it's weird. It's almost science fiction like.
Yeah.
When you think about these supernatural creatures having intercourse with females or males, because if I recall right, the passage in 2 Peter refers to Sodom and Gomorrah, and how that was a pattern, or they were taking up the practices of these fallen angels. So it could be heterosexual intercourse. It could have been homosexual intercourse. That either way, they're defiling the people, are becoming wicked, and that was not what God intended. And it's an unusual passage when we read it, because it's hard for us to get our head around what that would look like, and how do we know, right? How do we know this is a supernatural being if they're taking on inhabiting the bodies of man? How do we know that that's what's going on? It's a really, really strange story, but it's one that I think we have to, in the context, what it should do for us is say, there are some things about the supernatural realm that we just don't understand, we can't explain, and we have to take it for what it is. So.
And I think too that we can't just dance around it or avoid it. I think that as Christians, there are certain things that are pretty well talked about and documented in the New Testament it's easy to talk about. Jesus rising from the dead is supernatural. That's something that's not is unnatural. It's not something that can normally happen. But that, I think we have an easier time talking about that, and yet there are certain things that we kind of glaze over, go past, dance around, because either it makes us uncomfortable or we don't understand it and we're not willing to dive into it deeper. I don't think we can ever have a full understanding of it, but I think it is important that we do look at these. Right now in our youth group, we've been going through the book of Job, and at the beginning, talking about this heavenly council, and we'll get to that pretty soon as we're going through the Bible, but it's led to some really good questions. The students said, like, how can Satan be in the presence of God? And why is there a heavenly council if God is all-knowing and he makes the decisions on his own? Why does he need that? And sometimes we just don't have the answers, but it's good that we're having these conversations, because God put it's here for a reason.
A reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's here for us to know. Thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around the book of Genesis.